It is only in the moment between the stimulus and the response that awareness opens up a person to grow. When we see the same response over and over again, maybe as Albert Einstein said, we think about a person as doing the same action over and over. That's defined as insanity. Frankel brings a different opportunity for us to think about things by creating awareness of that stimulus and then identifying a different response. And really choosing to decide to do something differently is really what creates this opportunity for a new kind of growth. And really, it's that moment, that awareness that the stimulus has happened, and that awareness that allows somebody to grow in a new path. Psychology considers this in many different forms, but ultimately, first, to be able to create change, a person needs to be aware of what is happening, what stimuli are in their environment, and then they can make change. And Parshat Va-eira really, in a way, highlights this entire theme to begin with. Va-eira itself, I made myself seen, I made myself perceived in a way that maybe you saw this before, but you didn't see me in that light. God is opening up to us a new way of perceiving Him in all His greatness, but also in a way, by naming the Parsha Va-eira, I think it opens up a number of different things for us to consider as we perceive the players of this Parsha. Building on last week's Parsha, the Bnei Israel, as we are now starting to call them, the forming of the nation, but they are very downtrodden. They've been oppressed even more. They've lost their grain from last week. And the Bnei Israel complain and they say, hey, look, Moshe, we trusted you to go and save us, but all you did was make things worse. And Moshe comes to Hashem and he says, hey, look, what happened? And he uses a very interesting language here. It's kind of goes back to the Moshe that we know from the past. We sort of think about him as a person, maybe as a speech impediment. He says, Vani arel svatayim. And he actually says this twice. This repeated language that we use when we hear this in the Torah, we know it's raising something interesting. But this double lashon of arel svatayim here is brought down in a number of different ways to say not just that he had a speech impediment of some kind, but actually that this arel svatayim was on the recipients. The recipients of his words were not going to be able to understand what he was saying. Rambam brings this down. The Sforno brings this down. It actually says that Moshe recognized that his truth was not going to be able to be perceived because the listeners were not going to be able to be open to receiving it. There's different midrashim that say this also, but Moshe recognized that it wasn't what he was saying, but the audience that he was speaking to was not going to be able to understand or not going to be able to make room for what he was saying. So who is the audience that he's talking to? There's really two key audiences that we have here. One is Paro, and the other one is the Bnei Israel themselves. There's two kinds of blockages that we have here. We'll start with this. The two kinds of blockages that we have here, one is Paro, and he has a kaved lev. He has a heavy heart. In contrast, we have Bnei Israel who have a kotzar ruach, which is a sort of a constrained breath. And we'll take a moment to explore a little bit more about how each of these blockages functions differently and how maybe if we're ever faced with some kind of a similar situation, we could unblock ourselves a little bit too. So Onkelos actually brings down a very interesting definition. He's kind of translates the words, and when Onkelos brings down this translation for tichbad or vayichabed, whatever the lashon is for how Paro hardened his heart or his heart was hard, he uses two different words. Titakef, which is sort of like either that he was rigid or he reinforced or strengthened his heart, or tityakar. And it's actually interesting to think about both of these, because if you think about the titakef version of this, it's possible for us to understand that he had a resolve and that he maintained the resolve. And in some way, Paro became myopic in his resolve. He found some rationale that we talked about in last week's Parsha. There is a multitude. We're going to have to deal with this. We're going to take some rational action. And he wasn't able to see. I think we all know of strong-headed leaders who kind of decide that their way is right, and they are unable to integrate anybody else's perspectives. But what's maybe more interesting in this is the Tichakar version of things. because this definition, in a way, puts Paro's decision as to make this a priority. He prioritized this his perspective over any other one. And this perhaps is a way that he blocked himself and he wasn't able to receive any other perspectives in his way of thinking. Now, in contrast, we have the Bnei Israel, and the Bnei Israel were we just said that they were mikotza ruach, so they had a lack of breath. And because they had shortness of breath, they weren't able to intake. They couldn't do a full inhale. They weren't able to bring more stuff into their perspective. So they, from the other side of the coin, they, in contrast to Paro's certainty and conviction in his one way of doing things, they had disbelief that there was any other way of doing things. And their position came from that of doubt, such strong doubt that they were not able to move forward with a different way of thinking. And in a way, there's a way that we can think of this, that this mikotza ruach from avoda kasha, this way that it's described in the parsha, that when Moshe came and tried to tell them, look, I'm going to save you, God's going to save you, don't worry, they weren't able to understand this at all. The Mesilas Yesharim says that they weren't able to do any hisbonenus. This hisbonenus is the same thing that we talked about, that they weren't able to reach a level of understanding that they were actually going to be able to be saved. So they were stuck in survival mode, and they couldn't move past it. Zohar actually brings down just, and some of the Hasidic masters also, if you think about how to overcome this situation. So I was struggling a little bit this week. I've, kind of been a little bit overly intellectual and in my head a little bit lately, but also from a different perspective, maybe also a little blocked from prioritizing the wrong things. And some of the guidance that I've gotten, I reached out to Reb Shlomo. I found some explorations online as well, is to speak out loud, to take breaths and sigh, to make noise with your own body in the real world, is a way to help break yourself off from this potential of kotza ruach. When you find that you can't intake a full breath, is to actually make a vocalization. And in contrast, if we feel like perhaps we're blocked in the heart, that's when it's most important for us to do literally the opposite of what we think, is to accept that we know nothing. So don't think that you have the right answer. Don't even think you have half the answer. Just give up on having any answer at all. And that, in a way, will help free the person from the sort of the bounds and blockages of being able to hear a clear message from God, in order to be able to move forward. And if you think about this also, we'll just keep going. The Parsha continues and brings down the first 7 of the plagues from the 10 plagues. And what's interesting is, for the first 5, we hear that Paro hardened his own heart. And for the next 5, we hear that Paro, God helped him harden his heart a little bit. And what's interesting here is, we think, how can God punish Paro for doing something that he forced him to do? He had no free will. This part of the story here is about continuing to practice something. You're going to build good, strong habits. And sometimes those good, strong habits are built in the wrong things. So every time that Paro hardened his own heart, think about this, the synapses that fire together, wire together. He kept firing and wiring those same synapses, and eventually his brain could not see into a different way. So it became very challenging for him to move out of that same path or synaptic pathway, use a psychological explanation, that he had been building for himself within the first 5 plagues. And if we maybe close off by returning to the beginning of the Parsha, we have at the beginning of the Parsha the 4 Lashonos of Gula. We have Hotzeiti, Hitzalti, Ga'alti, and Lakachti. And each one of them, in a way, it describes a way of undoing the challenges that made these blockages happen for the Bnei Israel. At the end, there's a big debate about whether or not there's actually a 5th Lashon of Gula that's in the following pasuk, Beheveti. And there's different discussions, the Rambam, Rashi, that say whether or not we actually need to have on Pesach not the 4 cups, we have to have a fifth cup. Some people, so one of the ways that we satisfy it now is by bringing a kosher eliyahu. And if we, when we return to the land, vehaveti is this idea that when we get to return the Bnei Yisrael to the land of Eretz Yisrael, then maybe we should celebrate by drinking that fifth cup again. And there's some debate over whether or not we should, but we should be able to recognize where we have blockages and be aware of them and identify those, be able to take a deep breath and free our hearts from the wrong thing. In a way, maybe, we look at the way that we live today. Are we, in our own ways, making our own lives harder? Are we prioritizing the wrong things? Are we thinking about, blockages that maybe aren't really there? So it's with this hope that we look at Parshat Va-eira, we identify these kinds of awarenesses, and we free ourselves to be able to move forward and eventually reach that last expression of Geula, of Veheveti, with full clarity and full fulfillment as well. If any of these ideas spark any interesting ideas from you, or if you have any feedback at all, please do share it in the comment section or directly with me. Looking forward to hearing from you. All the best.